All right, welcome everyone who's just joined. I can see it's just about 2 o'clock, so might as well just get started since this session is being recorded and we have 45 minutes for today. So welcome to our session on creating safer, braver spaces for anti-racism in education. My name is Melina Valeriev. I work for Education Scotland and I'm the programme lead for the Building Racial Literacy programme. And I'm going to be joined by a couple of speakers that I'll introduce later on in this session. So just before we get started, a little reminder of our protocols for the session. So as you're joining, please remember to keep your microphone on mute and your cameras off. This session is being recorded as well. You're welcome to use the chat pane to share any comments and questions. We probably won't have much time for questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to post them during the session and we'll do our best to cover any questions. You have the closed captions feature for accessibility on Teams if you wish to use that. And also remember that this is a professional learning environment. We welcome a diverse range of thought and opinion. And as a Scottish Learning Festival session, it's important to note that the views and opinions expressed here are the presenter's own. So in this session, we're going to be looking at different examples of what safer, braver spaces can look like for anti-racism in education. So I'm going to be starting off telling you a bit more about the Building Racial Literacy programme as an example of a safer, braver space for anti-racism for educators as a professional learning programme. Then we'll hear from Navi Singh talking about his experience of the Building Racial Literacy programme as an educator. We will also hear from Ms. Florence, who will be sharing the experiences of children and young people's safer, braver spaces in the form of an anti-racist school club. And we'll end with St. Albert's Primary School, where Claire Harco will share some of the interesting things that have been happening in terms of safer, braver spaces for anti-racism. So first of all, why do we need safer, braver spaces for anti-racism in education? So I just thought I'd share, for example, the Intercultural Youth Scotland report, for a couple of years old now, but still very relevant, which shows us that actually a lot of children and young people continue to experience racist incidents and don't always feel safe or supported in different education environments. And what we often notice is that educators don't always feel confident enough or competent enough to deal with racism in education. And so what we need is safer spaces, both for the children and young people who might be experiencing racism, but also for educators to learn those skills and become braver in their anti-racism. In terms of the Scottish policy context, we also have the Teaching in a Diverse Scotland report that identifies racial literacy as a key priority for addressing the underrepresentation of Black, Asian and minority ethnic educators in Scotland. And racial literacy in that report refers to having the understanding and practice to recognise, respond and counter forms of everyday racism or racial microaggressions at all levels, so personal, cultural and institutional levels. And for me, that's a really good example of why we need those safer, braver spaces to learn those skills around anti-racism. So I'll show you an example of that, first of all. The Building Racial Literacy programme is a programme that's been co-constructed by a range of partners and has been funded by the Scottish Government as part of the Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education programme. For our first cohort back in January, we had 73 different educators from across Scotland who completed the programme in March, and this academic term we've got another 2 cohorts of more than 200 educators and education system leaders who are experiencing the programme. And the programme vision for Building Racial Literacy is that every educator in Scotland is racially literate and not race evasive. So what we're aiming for is that anti-racism becomes a baseline professional value and educators are empowered to identify and implement anti-racist behaviours and processes in their everyday practice. So in the programme, we create those safer, braver spaces for anti-racism. First of all, safer in the sense that we create space for those difficult conversations about race, where participants have the space to make mistakes, have the space to ask questions they might be afraid of asking for fear of offending people or saying the wrong thing, using the wrong terminology, but also space to learn from those mistakes. And we need safer spaces for that. We also need, so in the program, we have safer spaces for participants of color who might be at risk of experiencing racism and racial trauma. So we've got counselors there to support, and safer groups, smaller group networks. And is safer for all participants in terms of the support networks that the program offers. We also create braver spaces in the sense that we present the hard-hitting research and lived experiences of on racism in education, and a lot of that is very emotionally challenging. And with that, we have to start overcoming the fear of getting it wrong. So that's where we see our participants are being really brave in their actions as they develop their next steps for challenging racism in their different settings. And so, again, it's a space for being brave because we see participants taking action, be it curricular change or even setting an anti-racist club like in Drumchapel High School. And we'll hear more about that later on. And just to share the principles of the Building Racial Literacy program, throughout the program at the very beginning, we set the tone for this safer, braver learning space with the principles we've developed. So as a program of participants from across Scotland, we start off acknowledging that we're a community of practice. We're there together to learn. We all have rich and varied experiences, knowledges, and perspectives to add to the table. And the more perspectives we bring, the more diversity we offer, and that is a huge strength. So what we do to ensure that the space is more inclusive for everyone, we ask participants to follow the different principles and commit to them as we start to build our racial literacy together. So the first principle is around acknowledging emotions. So we often like to think about different issues like racism in an intellectual way. We like looking at the data, we like doing the research and engaging our brains, but actually it's also really important to engage our hearts and understand why racism is an issue, how it occurs, and also experience a lot of the different emotions racism can bring. So thinking about compassion, but also the hurt, the anger, the fear that comes with racism. So during conversations about racism that can be very difficult, we ask participants to take a note of their emotions on their reflective journals, for example, and trying to ask why we might be experiencing those emotions will actually lead to deeper learning. For participants of color, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic educators as well, it's important to recognize that some of those emotions might be linked to things like racial trauma. And for white majority ethnic participants, there might be some discomfort there around the emotions we experience. And so that brings us on to the second principle, which is around embracing productive discomfort. In any conversation about race, it's normal to actually experience some discomfort. And so it's really helpful to lean into that discomfort as much as possible, especially for white majority ethnic participants, educators. It's quite common to experience that discomfort. But for particularly participants of color, that discomfort can become distress if we're thinking about racial trauma. And that's where we ask participants to step back and commit to their self-care, really ask themselves what they need to be doing to stay committed to anti-racism in the long run. There's often a risk of burning out or being too emotionally drained. So that's another principle that comes into our program, the commitment to self-care. The final two principles are around building relationships. So we're more likely to engage in anti-racism and be more productive in our efforts if we're actually trying to build relationships and call people in rather than pointing fingers and calling them out. And if we see the capacity for growth in everyone, both ourselves, we might be making mistakes in our efforts or in our conversations, but actually mistakes are part of of any learning journey. We need that growth mindset. And we also need to view others as having the capacity to grow, to learn from their mistakes and make things better. So those are the principles that help the building racial literacy as a safer, braver learning space. A couple of examples of the impact of the program. At the end of the program, 100% of our participants felt more confident dealing with racist incidents in their workplace and felt more confident in general to talk about racism and deal with racism. I'm now going to pass on to one of our participants. So Navi Singh is a teacher of business management, and he completed the Building Racial Literacy program in March 22. And I'm just going to stop sharing so that we can see Navi. So welcome, Navi, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So I've not got any slides or anything like that, so you'll just have to look at my face. So as Melina says, my name's Navi Singh, and I was a participant on the first cohort of the Building Racial Literacy programme. And I'm just going to talk a wee bit about why I personally think that we need now more than ever these safer, braver spaces for anti-racism. And I'm also going to talk about my experience of the programme, the impact that it's had on my teaching as an educator, and also on my learners within school. So I'll start. I was meeting one of my pals just the other day, just for a catch up, and he says to me, "Do you have any regrets?" Which, first of all, I was like, that's a pretty profound question from you. If you knew my pal, you'd understand what I mean by that. But anyway, I've always prided myself on someone that thought that I don't have any regrets, always live in the moment, stay present, that kind of thing. However, this time I just blurted out, I wish and I regret that I pushed down all my culture, and I was embarrassed by my culture when we went to school. And I thought it's something I'd never really thought of properly, but I really do regret it. When I was at school, I would go home wishing all the time that I was the same as everyone else, majority of the time wishing I was white. I remember thinking, even back further when I was in primary school, I remember I had a big group of pals over to my house for a birthday party, and my grandpa was there. And I remember feeling so embarrassed that my grandpa was walking around with his turban on. And when I think about that now, I feel so sad. But I pushed away everything in terms of even things like learning to speak Punjabi, learning about my family history, even going to visit my more traditional family, shall we say. I stopped doing all that. And I honestly believe that this was partly due to the fact that there was no such concept of racial literacy in my school. I would regularly face racial abuse, even from my close friends, and I'd often find myself making the racist jokes about myself before somebody else did. Something I later found, as you can imagine, was very damaging to my mental health. I would go home, try and find role models who looked like me, whether that be in music or film or whatever it was. There certainly wasn't any in football at that time. Even when I would find one, though, it was a role model for me. It wasn't for everybody else, or it wasn't for everyone. It was just a role model for me, so it didn't really have that value to me. And I didn't realise it at the time, but I know for a fact that I would have benefited massively from having a safer, braver space in which to not only improve my own racial literacy, but also that of others. But fast forward 10 years on, and somehow I'm a teacher, a secondary school teacher. If you told me that 10 years ago back then, I'd have told you were mad. But anyway, here I am. I'm a fairly new teacher. I'm only in my third year. So I was still trying to juggle everything. Everything's still going 24 hours a mile, 24 hours a mile, a million mile an hour, I should say. But I'd heard, as soon as I heard about the Building Racial Literacy programme, I knew it was something that I wanted to get involved in. It was exactly that safer, braver space that I knew I was needing. As soon as we got on the programme, the first kind of order of business was a very strong focus on mental well-being for all participants. There was also the reassurance that we were always going to get things massively wrong at times, but that was what it was all about, kind of growing from that. The programme was also very action-focused, which I loved. I'd been on a few kind of anti-racist programmes before, and without slagging them too much, they were a bit wishy-washy, whereas this one I felt was very, very focused. I felt that all the participants on the programme that were from all different backgrounds and experiences were working towards kind of the same common goal. And the consistent sharing of each other's knowledge and experience really, really helped us. Perhaps the biggest benefit or the biggest impact that I found was in the kind of planned reflection or guided reflection, I should say, that was embedded throughout. It's something I've kind of always hated doing. I've never been very good at reflecting, or I've always begrudged doing it. However, this time it just flowed, and I was able to understand so much more about myself and about the things I experienced day to day, but also the experience that I spoke about as a young person at school. I was able to understand, for example, the process that I went through in relation to the stages of racial identity development that we learned about in the course, something that I'd never given a second thought. It's also massively increased my confidence in having conversations surrounding race and racism. Since leaving school, it's not necessarily something that I've ever shied away from, having these kind of conversations. However, it's also not something that I've maybe dealt with in the most constructive way. Whereas now, obviously, I've still a long way to go, but I really feel like I could deal with and cope with any conversation constructively, at least. I've also been confident enough to deliver back some of the things that we've learned back to other members of staff within my school. The programme gave me a safe space to better understand myself and the world around me. Not only this, but it was definitely a brave space in relation to like the topic areas, subject areas that we covered. They were fantastic. For example, looking at the link between racism and colonialism, something that I've explored for quite some time, but never really had the bravery myself to converse fully about. And I think now more than ever, this is something that we really, really need. As well as this, as a teacher, I think as teachers, you know the benefits, and we always talk about early interventions and things like that. Oh, this pupil's off track. We need to kind of provide them with extra support, or put in processes to kind of help them get to where they need to be. However, I think that the programme has shown me that we need these early interventions in relation to supporting pupils, all pupils, on their anti-racist journey. It's our duty as educators to kind of support this journey. Lastly, in terms of how it converted into impact for my learners in my school, I think I've come to better understand that every single pupil that walks through any school doors is going to have this sort of preconceived notion of what racism is. And I think it's our job as educators to ensure that they leave with this being a positive notion, positive and progressive, and that anti-racism should not be self-taught. No pupil should be going away and having to self-teach themselves about these things. It should be embedded throughout our curriculum already. Just like I needed that safer and braver space of the Building Racial Literacy programme to progress myself, so do our pupils. And I think aside from this, the effects of racism are, of course, a mental health issue, which is why we really do need these interventions and safe spaces. I never ever want any pupil to feel the way that I did and so many other young people have felt throughout school. So this has led to me setting up my own anti-racist group within my school, which is actually just starting next week. And we're going to be focusing on leading change and creating that safer, braver space in which to build our own school's racial literacy. So I'm going to finish off just from something that a pupil said. It wasn't actually one of my own pupils. This came from a document which was shared with us at the Building Racial Literacy programme, which featured pupils kind of relaying back to their senior leadership about why they need anti-racism. And it's an absolute brilliant excerpt from what they spoke about. I would really, really urge all of you to read it if you get a chance. It's on the Anti-Racist Educator. But the pupil says, if we keep going with this and we continue our anti-racism efforts, we can come closer to the first and most difficult ambition of all school pupils and young people, which is just simply to belong. So I think that kind of sums it all up, to be honest. I think they're absolutely brilliant in what they're saying there. But that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Navi. That was fantastic to hear about your experience of the Building Racial Literacy program, but also your lived experiences as a young person, as an educator. That was all really powerful and insightful. So thank you so much. I'm now going to pass on, just sharing my screen again, to the young people at Drum Chapel High School have created a fantastic presentation from the Anti-Racist Club that they run. And I just wanted to point out they are also featured in the BRL Plus webinar that I've linked here with a QR code if you'd like to check it out. And we have a member of the club, a teacher, history teacher, Ms. Florence, who has volunteered to speak on their behalf. So thank you so much, Ms. Florence, for joining us today. I'm just going to, there we go, we can see you. So I'm going to pass on to you, and I'm happy to just move on the slides when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Miss Florence, and as we've said, the Drum Chapel High School Anti-Racist Society had entrusted me to speak on their behalf and tell you a wee bit about their experiences of their club. So over the next 10 minutes, I will be telling you what life was like before they set up the Anti-Racist Club in January 2022, and then we'll be talking a wee bit about their experiences of it and what the club actually does to give you some ideas maybe, and then finally looking at the impact that the students feel it's had on themselves personally and then also the school as a community. So firstly, looking at life before our Anti-Racist Club, unfortunately the students said that they had noticed quite prevalent bullying in the school, and that bullying could look like racist language and racist bullying in classes and in the corridors. And obviously, as a teacher, that's something you never want to hear. But the students had said that they felt that perhaps this came a wee bit from confusion. So maybe students and teachers didn't really have the language available to them to actually address the racism or to know that what was being said was racist. And all of this kind of culminated into them feeling quite unheard in the school, and that they didn't really have a place where they could talk about racist things that happened or talk about anti-racism. But fast forward to now, so about 9 months since they started the club, it couldn't be more different, luckily. And the things that we do as a club, I'll just give you some information about what we do as a club. I'm actually in the anti-racist classroom at the moment, so that's a space where the students can come at break time and at lunchtime, and where they can come and just relax, spend time together and talk about any issues that they're having. And they also teach each other about anti-racism and they share resources. Then they have their weekly meetings on a Monday, which is led by their president, Bruna, who's with me today in the background. And they'll have an agenda, and in this meeting they'll be talking about events that they're going to be running in the school. So we're working at the moment on planning a carnival, which will kind of highlight all of the kind of cultural aspects of different people in the school. And we also are looking into leading some outreach sessions to teachers and students, as well as being involved in Glasgow-wide events, that things like meeting the Glasgow Girls. We also have a blog which some of our students keep up to date, and most recently there's been a blog written about culture and what culture means to different people, so I would encourage you to check that out. Looking at the kind of how the experience has actually made the people in the club feel, I think importantly it's a community. So that's what I noticed when I actually joined the club only in September. It's just a community of learners. They're all different ages. They've got first year to sixth year, and they feel comfortable in each other's space. And it's a very joyful place. When you come in, you think, oh wow, everyone's really happy to be here. And I think that has a knock-on effect on the learners wanting to come to school. And it's a safe space where the members of the society can come and talk about racism they might have experienced or ideas about anti-racism, but more importantly, they feel empowered because it's actually, they can do something about it. So they can chat and they can actually put on school events, they can talk to the head teacher, and they can actually make a change and impact the ethos of the school. So that's their experiences. And thinking about how's this actually affected them, how's this impacted them, I think confidence is a major one. So all of the students in the club are learning skills. So I forgot to mention in the wee corner there, you'll see our logo. So that was made by one of our artists in the club and who's also with me. And you can see that the students are creating an identity for themselves as the Anti-Racist Club, and they're gaining skills like leadership and communication skills, which is going to help them in later life and help them to enhance the club and just make it bigger. And as I said, sometimes they teach each other. So every kind of once a week, one student will take the lead and teach the others about an aspect of anti-racism that they've been researching, or they'll share some links to resources they found useful. And so they're constantly learning about anti-racism, and as a result, they're actually permeating this through the school, because they bring that to the teachers, they bring that to their classmates, and that ethos is spreading throughout the school. And the students, when I asked them, said that they have very much noticed that the rest of the school, the student body, is aware of other cultures, and their other cultures are being celebrated, which they hadn't necessarily been before. And I think, speaking to the students, they think the terminology that's being used and the fact that anti-racism is like a buzzword that's been used a lot because everyone knows about the Anti-Racist Club, means that other students and teachers that aren't necessarily involved feel more comfortable engaging with what is racism, how can we be anti-racist, and creating these safer, braver spaces. And then I'd say the final impact is that the students, which I'm really glad to hear about, they just feel that anti-racism is taken more seriously in the school, and they feel like it's at the top of the agenda, which means that students know that racism is unacceptable, but also there's a safe space where we can learn about anti-racism together. I just want to finish off on the last slide, Melina, and it's got just some words that I asked the students to tell me that how do they feel as being part of the society. So the words that were coming up most often was safe, physically safe, in that they know they can come to school and they're safe, but safe to learn as well, and safe to express themselves, which is important. And then also you can see the other words, happy and proud to be part of something that's actually making a difference and changing something. So for me, I've just loved being part of the Anti-Racism Club, and I'm happy to have been able to share with you some of their work.
Thank you so much, Ms. Florence, for sharing the experiences of the Anti-Racism Club, Anti-Racism Society at Drumchapel High School, and thank you to the young people in the background for all their hard work putting that presentation together. Really fantastic work going on, so thanks again for sharing.
Thank you.
I'm now going to just move on to our next group, making sure I've got my audio working on the screen. So we are now going to hear from St. Albert's Primary School. So we've got our head teacher, Claire Harker here, who is actually a current participant on the Building Racial Literacy program. I'm going to share a very short clip that explains the work that Claire and her school have been doing, and then we'll hear from Claire and some children in the school.
Hi, my name is Louisa Wines. I'm Principal Teacher at St Albert's, and I have had the pleasure of being involved in the We Can Be Heroes book project. Our book project started when we realised that lots and lots of the books in our school libraries didn't represent the community that we serve here in Pollokshields.
The pupils at St Albert's Primary School in Glasgow read in class every day, but they felt the characters they met in the books they read didn't reflect their own lives and backgrounds. So they've been getting creative and making their own. Here's our arts correspondent, Pauline McLean.
This is a story about storytelling. Who tells them? Who gets to be in them? Pupils at this Glasgow primary school surveyed their library and realised it didn't say much about them.
Who do not have English names use English names when they're writing. Most of our children have heritage somewhere else, and they don't use their own names when they write, so they don't see themselves as heroes in their own story, and they wanted to change.
My experience was they were still going towards non-BME sort of names and characters, and we had to kind of gently encourage them to say, okay, you know, how about we make them look like you? And, you know, and it's one of those things where I've written stories now for this project in which we've got superheroes who are female and wear a hijab, you know, and that's absolutely wonderful.
My name is Inigo.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to pass on to you, Claire, and the children. Thanks.
Okay, dogs. Anna, thanks for that. Thank you so much. My name's Claire Harker and I'm head teacher of this beautiful school. This is Halima and Iman, and they'll introduce themselves in a bit. And thanks very much for the opportunity to tell our story, because we feel as if every time we get to tell our story, we might affect some kind of change. Our school motto is creating conscience-led communities. So we want our children to grow up with the resources they need to change communities for the better and make them more equitable. It's important that I explain over 300 children. We have 21 children in a co-located provision on an alternative pathway, and more than 95% of our children are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic group. And we are a Catholic school, and only 3 of our children are Catholic. Most of our children are Muslim. So I wanted to say, I know this is really cheesy when we use quotes, but the Maya Angelou quote that you'll all have heard before, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And that resonates with me, because if our children come to school and don't see their story, aren't part of the story, for us, that must be agony. So we have to be a brave and a safe space where our children can be brave, can be safe, and can simply be themselves. So this includes all of our families, all of our children, all of our staff, and all of the protected characteristics which are reflected in all of our reading materials. So basically, our whole curriculum has to be designed to fit our profile. So everything, you know, we're kind of making a commitment to say we're not doing it unless our children are in. And I think that we know from what we know about the narrative and the creation of curricular work in Scotland, our children are left out. So we want them to be in, and that means we have to design a curriculum here that fits them. Fortunately, before we started messing about with it, that is the essence of what Curriculum for Excellence asks us to do. So what Scotland has is a curriculum that is a gift for anti-racist and culturally responsive work. We just need to make sure we go back to that essence, as opposed to some of the structures that have been put around. That's quite strong talk, but it works for us. So we do this in some very obvious ways in our school. So, for example, rather than throw out reading books because they don't represent the families and the culture and the beliefs and systems of our children, we teach our children to be critically literate and therefore look at the materials in front of them and be able to say, well, that's not what my family look like, that's not what all families look like, and really be able to critique that material. That's maybe one way of thinking. We do a lot of political sort of analysis of the news. We do a lot of arts work, because there's a way of telling your story through arts, whether that's the contemporary art exhibition or dance or film. And sort of IDL, so it's Climate Challenge Week next week, and we are focusing all of that on Pakistan and what's happening in Pakistan, where many of our families, their heritage is from. Today we had a coffee morning to raise money for Pakistan. We've been eating cake all day. And last week we had a day of prayer for Pakistan, and obviously we're a Catholic school, but the prayers that we did was the khutbah and Jummah prayers, is that right? Yeah. And it was the most emotional thing. So it's these whole cultural experiences, as well as a critical analysis of the curriculum to ensure that our children are in. We also have to think about the subtleties. So learning to use correct language, learning to communicate. I do think prayer is really important. Just being welcoming without being judgy. And that's the kind of tone that we set. And I'd say that all of our community, the evidence would suggest that they feel included in our programmes and our conversation. We also have to accept our advantage. If we're talking about racism as a disadvantage, we have to accept, the staff have to accept, who are all white majority ethnic, we have to accept our advantage and use that and become allies, which is really difficult, and that's the discomfort Melina was talking about, but we just have to accept that. So the We Can Be Heroes project was a very simple project. All of our children, when they were doing writing, any kind of writing, and things like guess the teddy's name, all of these things, they would use English names, right? And I couldn't understand why Halima wouldn't use Halima in a story, but Halima would be likely to use Claire in a story. And that seems a bit bonkers to me. But she, not she, but the name Halima, it's because we're teaching our children that the stories that are present in our schools, the characters have English names or are marginalised or in stereotypes. So what we have done lots of heritage work around folk tales and things. We didn't want this to be this. We wanted it to be about children putting themselves as heroes in their own stories. It's as simple as that. So we worked with authors and illustrators to produce books that are now actually in the archive of the Scottish Library. They're on an Etsy shop. And we've produced 2 lots of books. It was funded by the School Library Improvement Fund as well. And the stories are about going to space, being a detective, going into the rainforest, you know, sort of representative of what our children want to do, as opposed to the stereotypes that might appear in the reading materials and film and TV and stuff. And we do believe that someone has said that Marvel have copied us, you know, with their latest heroine, I think. So really, what that has changed is it has changed children's attitudes towards writing, and it has changed. The evidence is telling us that the children are using their own names and putting themselves as heroes. Some of our children are saying more confident, more present, and it's actually taught us a lot about like subtle analysis. You know, you need to notice what the names are that children use. So basically, in terms of a safe space, what the ambition is that our school is a safe space, the whole school. It has to be. I would hope that I would create a safe space in any school that I worked in, but it's much more important that this is a safe space because of what we see the children experience every day. So they're going to read some of their stories. Yeah, on you go.
Hello, my name is Halima and I'm going to be reading Umar's Gem. Good morning, Umar. Auntie Shamim waved at me. Morning, Auntie. I couldn't help but smile, but that was soon interrupted by Maya shoving past me. Stop being such a suck-up, Maya muttered to me as she walked away. I wasn't being a suck-up, just polite. As I walked down the street, I felt inside my jacket pocket for the gem, and as my fingers touched it, I could feel the power from it grow through my body. I could control the powers a lot better now. I'd had years of experience. I sped so quickly that nobody could see me go past them. Help! Somebody! The voice made me stop. It was coming from the park. Help! I moved quickly towards it until I found an old man whose foot was stuck underneath a fallen branch. Oh, young man, can you find someone that can help? He looked like he was in pain. Not taking a moment to think or look to see if anyone was watching, I touched the gem again and used the super strength they gave me to lift the branch off his leg. The old man looked at me in shock. How did you do that? Adrenaline. I reached out to him and helped him stand. Can you walk? He bent his leg and then took a few steps. His face broke out into a smile. No damage done. If I'd been under that any longer, it may have been a different story. I can't thank you enough.
Hello, my name is Iman and I'm going to be reading 66 James Street. They walked around the mossy brickwork to the front of the house, but they froze instantly. It looked exactly like their house, but the metal art said 99 Strange Street. Is this our house? Mushtaba scratched his head. We must have ended up in another house further down the street. Arfa tried to reason, but everything's the same. The disgusting brickwork, the grey concrete, the rusted black fence. Alpha looked around. The Mushtaba was right. They looked the same. So they went inside. There were the same stained grey walls, the same scratched flooring, and there were even 3 doors under the cupboard. Then Alpha heard something. It sounded like footsteps.
You? Thank you so much. And just to add to that, what's happening now is the books are becoming sort of core readers. So we've got a lot of work around the comprehension of the books. So they've written their own reading scheme basically, and the next steps for us are to look at graphic novels, and would like to have a writer in residence. And we also want to record some of them for radio, etc. Okay, thank you so much for allowing us to tell our story.
Thank you so much, Halima and Iman. That was such a fantastic story to share, extracts of stories. I've got 2 of my own books. I went to visit your school before the summer. I was so impressed by how many books you've all produced and how you've all become authors, writing your own stories, published authors. We're so impressed by everything you're doing. And thank you so much, Claire, for sharing that. We actually have about 5 more minutes left if anyone wants to come in with any questions before we close the session, or if anyone wants to share anything else. Claire, I think you also mentioned how families were involved in a lot of this work, so creating safer, braver spaces for families. Was wondering if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the whole journey, is making sure people feel comfortable with school, particularly people whose heritage was maybe left out of school, like we heard earlier, or people who don't speak English as their first language. So we've just tried to create that kind of atmosphere here. But the authors worked with parents and their children so that they could tell, like, on a creative writing piece. So a couple of those stories are in the books, and we hope to extend that further. And one of our dads is a published author, so he was sort of involved in that too. So yeah, and it's really important that we get our dads into in terms of gender. So it's just really taken off, and we're really heartened by it, and really heartened by having all of the protected characteristics represented in our libraries, how that has changed attitudes and approaches to school as well.
Thank you. And I wonder if Halima or Iman, would you like to share anything about how it feels to be reading these stories that have your names or experiences you can relate to?
I feel very happy. I feel really proud that our names are in the book, and like there's other religions in the books as well.
Oh, thank you so much. That's fantastic. So it really makes a huge difference, I think, having that safer space, braver as well, to see yourself as a superhero in a book. So you can be brave, you can do anything. And as people have said in the chat pane there, those stories are marvelous, they're fabulous. Marvel probably did steal one of your ideas, so we'll have to work on copyright for next time. But yeah, thank you so much to St. Albert's Primary for sharing your story. And thank you to all our presenters as well. So Drumchapel Anti-Racism Society with Miss Florence, and also Navi Singh from the Building Racial Literacy Programme, Cohort 1, and to all our attendees today for sharing this, what I hope felt like a safer, braver space for anti-racism in education. It'd be great to continue seeing more of these safer spaces, safer, braver spaces, where there are educators making bold curricular changes, like in St. Albert's School, to really create a culturally responsive curriculum, but also safer spaces for young people and educators of colour who might experience racism, or educators who are trying to be more anti-racist. And remember to tweet your experiences of this session using the hashtag SLF22 or mySLF22. And I think that's it for us today. Thank you everyone for your time. Hope you have a lovely day. Bye.